Good morning. Morning. Before I say anything else, I'll ask you to silence your electronic devices, get that out of the way so we don't have any interruptions. Welcome to the Art of Philanthropy, Achieving Your Charitable Goals. Our speaker today is Mike Goorhouse. He's President, CEO of the the Community Foundation of the Holland Zeeland area. He's been involved with the foundation for 20 years. He started in high school. He was on the youth advisory committee, and 4 years after college, he became a staff member. Is that right? Yep. And he's been president CEO for 8 years. He is active on several nonprofit boards and has a master's degree in public and nonprofit administration from Grand Valley State University. So here he is.
Cool. Thanks, Jean. Oh, thank you. Well, I haven't said anything yet. That's the welcome clap. We'll see if we get the closing clap. No, it's wonderful to be with you all today. And is the mic picking up okay? It sounds like it is from my end, but you guys can hear me okay? Good. In our online, it's amazing the world we live in now. We got to make sure the folks online can hear and see as well as those here in person, but glad this can be virtual and folks can participate that way. I can't see you if you're virtual, which is just fine, but we want you to be engaged as well. So if you have, I don't know if I'm promising something that we can deliver on, but if someone has a question, they can put it in the chat and you can relay it to me. Great. Perfect. I am here for you all, not for me. So the whole question about when to have questions at every point along the way, please. And I'm going to ask for some feedback from you all too. I hope you're ready on this Monday morning for a little bit of conversation because it's fun to just talk about this topic. And for those of you who are showing up today, you have some interest in it, which is good. So when they first reached out about this conversation and asking if I could come join you all, I think the phrasing of the first email caught me. I think Gina will remember my response was a little bit hedgy because the question that was asked of me was, we want to have a conversation amongst the House members about how to best decide how to use our philanthropic resources. And I responded kindly with, I might not be your person, and I'm not sure there is a person who's going to be able to answer that question for you, because I would challenge the premise that we can at least very succinctly and accurately have some sort of equation for how we can decide how to best use our philanthropic resources, which is actually going to be a huge part of my conversation with you the other day is talking that through why I believe that. So they agreed that my challenge to the premise was okay. They really wanted a broad dialogue around all the different ways people have tried to figure out the best way to use their philanthropic resources for the most impact in the world. That I am happy to be a part of, because I have had the privilege of working with a lot of different families, companies, individuals who have pursued that goal. How can they best use their resources to make impact in the world from their frame, from their personal frame, from their company frame, from the way they want to engage in the world. So I'm not going to give any answers today. I will give you hopefully lots of things to think about. And that would be the goal by the time we're done here. So let's start with a little bit of just quick brainstorming. And I didn't use the PowerPoint. I didn't even give you handouts. By age, I'm a millennial, but I don't always act like a millennial. So I asked for a little whiteboard and some markers. I'm a teacher by training, so my degree is in education. So I still like this. So I think the folks online are gonna be able to see me if I'm doing this. Good. Okay. So we're gonna work this way. So first question, can you give me just some examples of types of organizations, not names of organizations? We're not going to dive into individual organizations, pros and cons and all that today, but some types of organizations that you might support philanthropically. Yeah, go ahead. Civic theater. Okay. Just go ahead and shout them out. I'm just going to try to capture some of them here. Yep. So colleges and universities. So higher ed. Okay. Yep. Nature-based organizations. Yep. Keep going. Healthcare. Yep. That's a big one. A lot of resources go into healthcare. Okay. Go ahead. Housing, food. Yep. Kind of some of your basic fundamental needs. Yep. This is good. What else? Yeah, please. There you go. There you go. So I'm going to specifically say tutoring, and then, education comes in a lot of forms, but I like that you named tutoring. This is good. Yeah, please. Yeah, yeah. So for a lot of people, this is, well, statistically, this is the area of giving that is the highest in our country. The most amount of philanthropic resources go to faith-based bodies of worship, and education second, and healthcare is third by statistics. So faith-based organizations. What else comes to mind? Types of organizations. This is a good list, so we don't have to get through the whole IRS taxonomy of nonprofits, but
NGOs.
NGOs in general. Yeah. And when I hear NGO, that tends to have an international flavor to it. So I didn't know if that was intended by your comment, but I'm just going to, for the sake of conversation today, put that on here. Not that there's no formal definition for NGO. Stands for a non-governmental organization. And so I say that has an international flavor because oftentimes in the US, we use the phrase nonprofit to categorize what we're talking about today. But internationally, they tend to use NGO for a non-governmental organization, which actually makes sense, right? So if you think about any of these organizations and how we get to this conversation, even the fact that we're having a question about the art of philanthropy in a session on this today, we are entering with somewhat of a fundamental premise that we're talking about nonprofit organizations, but we could challenge that too. That could be a whole nother half session. But in the United States, by tax code, we carve out these things called nonprofit organizations, right? So the most common are 501c3 organizations. There are other smaller groups that are considered charitable, but by tax code, we give a tax advantage for gifts to 501c3 organizations. But in a lot of places around the world, they don't have a tax categorization and they don't have a tax incentive. And so that's where they get a lot of this. Hey, you're doing something for the public, but you aren't the government. So we didn't pay you taxes to do the work, but you're doing something for the public good. So they just call them non-governmental organizations. It's the safest way to do it. In our case, we call them nonprofits because by being a 501c3, the primary definer is there are no shareholders making a profit. So it's a little more nuanced than that, but at the end of the day, that's what we've said. We've said that entity doesn't have a singular shareholder or multiple shareholders that is benefiting financially from the profits at the end of the year. Doesn't mean you can't generate a profit as a 501c3. You just can't pay it out to shareholders. You have to keep it in the organization for future use. So anyways, that was a bit of a side, but NGO had the international flavor. So anything else we want to throw on the list today? We got a good list to work with. Yeah, there you go. Counseling, mental health. That's a good one. We can dive into that one, especially today. Yep. Animal welfare. Yep. Addiction recovery. Now I'm going to really get down to the bottom here. Yes. Research is a big one. Okay, I'm going to pause for now because this is mainly just going to be the body we're going to work from. So we aren't going to dive into the topics. We're going to dive into how do you decide, how do you think about using your philanthropic resources in the most effective way. So let's do this. I think we had this even in the write-up. I mentioned a little bit of a comparison of decision-making in the philanthropic world, the nonprofit world, the charitable giving world, with decisions in your investment side of your life on the financial markets. So let's get a bit of quick pause here and do this, and then you'll see how it connects. So in the financial part of your world, if you make an investment, what are you primarily hoping for in return for your investment? Or what are you trying to accomplish by investing dollars in the public markets or buying into a local company? What's your purpose for doing that? Your income, right? Yeah. So you put dollars in, and what are you taking out? Dollars, right? So You may have other reasons why you've invested in that particular company or organization. You might believe in their mission or what else going on, but primarily you're putting dollars in and you're taking dollars out. So 10 years ago, if you had, I'll pick a nice round number, $1,000 to invest, and you had two options, and your options were Apple or Google, you had $1,000. And at the time, you had lots of people giving you advice about which of these investments was going to be the best investments. And you were going to invest this for 10 years. You just knew on the front end, you have 10 years till you needed this money. So lots of people gave you good advice, and you decided, you picked, doesn't matter. You picked one. And at the end of the day, we will be able to say what your $1,000 turned into. This is a hypothetical exercise. I didn't do the math, so I don't really know. But let's just say your Apple investment turned into $10,000 and your Google investment turned into $8,000 if you had done those, right? At the end of the day, we can go back and say which of the two was the better investment, right? Like it's dollars in, dollars out. And at the end of the day, you put the same thing in, and on the way out, you have something that's comparable to each other numerically, objectively, and we can definitively say that from a financial perspective, your investment in Apple would have been the better choice than investment in Google. Okay. Now, that's very helpful, right? Because dollars are numbers. Dollars are numbers. You put numbers in, you get numbers out. You can compare. I picked two tech companies, but your options could have been Apple and Pepsi, or it could have been comparing Apple and a local startup grocery store in your neighborhood, or whatever it may be. Now, the world is starting to complicate this message because there are more and more people and entities who are taking additional layers of thought into their investments beyond just dollars. So, people take considerations around the environmental impact of the organizations or other kinds of values the organizations may have. This is getting a little bit more complicated than it used to be, but by and large, when you take your retirement account and you put it in the markets, you have a frame for saying, if I took one strategy and your spouse took another strategy, at the end of the time, which strategy was better or more effective at accomplishing its goals? It's fairly easy to do. Now, what's ironic is it's fairly easy to measure at the end which one was the better investment. But on the front end, there's a billion-dollar industry trying to tell you which of those two is going to be the best 10-year investment. And I'm not so convinced they're that much better than the weather people. It's a little facetious. I work with them all day long. They try very, very hard. They just don't know. We just don't know, right? It's very, very hard to know what 10-year investment is going to work for all kinds of things, because what you don't know is someone else going to come with a better phone, or so is the government going to shut you down because you're a monopoly, or whatever, whatever it may be, right? So my point is, you have a bazillion people trying to analyze this industry, telling you what the best investment is, and they don't always have a very good way of doing it. But historically, looking backwards, we can. That's the one advantage. Looking forwards, very hard. Looking backward, we can do a pretty good job of analyzing what's the best. Now, okay, let's flip back to philanthropy and charitable giving, because that's the reason we're here. So in this financial case, we had dollars in and dollars out. In the charitable world, what are we putting in? Dollars. For the sake of today, we could put in your time as well, but for the sake of today, we'll talk dollars, dollars in. What are we looking for on the out? Outcomes. Okay. What would be the outcomes if you were giving to a civic theater? Okay. Dynamic theater program. Good. This isn't right or wrong. I ask a lot of hypothetical questions today, so don't everyone be like, oh, geez, I didn't, there's not like, there's not. So dynamic theater program. Okay. What else? When you're thinking, yeah. Okay. Right. So now we got to not just good programming, but it's who you threw in an audience. You said children. So for you, children having access was an important piece. Then you mentioned a third word, inclusive. You said three things in one. You said program, so quality program, a specific audience, children, and then you said inclusive, which makes me think that there's a particular subset of students that you're most interested in making sure have access to the program. Okay, and now you're going even further. You want the cake, you eat it too, plus the cherry on top, and you also want to make sure that it carries on. Okay, that's okay. That's good. Let's talk about outcomes in. Let's pick a different one. So let's do housing. Let's do food. I'm just gonna do food. So if you're debating whether to give to a food-based organization, a food insecurity organization, what are you hoping for your outcomes? Yeah. So I heard healthier community and I heard more people have food. So I'm gonna say both those things, but also I'm going to juxtapose them on each other. And so at the end of the day, likely if you're giving to a food-based organization, you believe that people having food is some sort of bedrock to other successful things in life. Maybe you believe in Maslow's hierarchy, or like just the idea that if you have to have energy in your body to then accomplish other things. So a baseline, we need more people with food. And then healthier community, those things are connected. But let me just ask a question. So is it the amount of food that we're interested in, or the healthiness of the food that we are interested in? Okay. So for you, it is about if a family or individual, let's just say science says you need 2,000 calories a day. If you aren't getting 2,000 calories, it's gonna be tough to do all the other things in life. So that's yep. Okay. Let me ask back to this question. So like as an outcome, are we looking for the most number of people getting access to food or calories? Or are we looking for the healthiest food being distributed? Yes, I heard both. Online folks, do you have any reactions to whether we're looking for healthy food or volume of food? No reactions, that's okay. So make sure they're still there. Okay, so we're just going to leave that one, for now. We're not going to answer the question, but we're going to do one in a second here. But you're beginning to understand why I'm saying that this is a much more challenging thing, right? Because even within one very specific topic, I mean, food insecurity is one very specific thing on this list. Even within that, I'm not sure everyone would answer the question of what we're looking for the same. There isn't a right or wrong answer, in my opinion, but I'm not sure we'd all answer that question the same. You know what? Actually, I'm going to dig a little bit even more into this while we're here. So I have had the privilege to serve on 3 different boards of 3 different nonprofits that are working on food insecurity. Very, very different approaches. And in 2 of the organizations, we ultimately wrestled with this question very deeply. Is it about volume of people we are serving or healthiness of the food? Of course, the answer is both, right? But the answer is both. But you still have day-to-day practical decisions to make, because usually healthier foods are more expensive, right? So we would wrestle with this topic and say, if we had the beginning of every year $1 million in the bank account to spend on food, some level, you are deciding, do you want to feed 10,000 people with $100 worth of food each, or do you want to feed 20,000 people on $50 of food each? And depending on which direction you go, the quality of food you're going to be able to buy for them is different. Now, we, in both cases, agreed very, very strongly that it's not either end of the continuum. Right? It is not, we are only providing caviar and the best beef that money can buy, and we're only going to serve a small number of people. We also agreed it is not, we want the cheapest, most processed, and, it's technically calories, but we're not quite sure, kind of food. But someone's given it a whole truckload so we can serve the whole, right? Like, we knew it wasn't either end of the continuum. We knew it was somewhere in this messy middle. but how do you decide, right? How do you decide decision by decision? So that is a real dilemma that I am not going to be able to solve for you, and you're not going to be able to solve for each other. You're going to have to decide in your own heart. At the end of the day, if you're the one deciding how to give your philanthropic resources, you're going to have to decide which on that continuum. You probably agree it's not either end, but where on the continuum do you fall? Do you want to serve a little more healthy food with a few less people, or more volume? Go ahead. Yes. Yep. Yeah. Yep. 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 Bingo. Yep. Yeah. So let me play off that and say, okay, so now I kind of made a case that outcomes are tough even within food. Now let's look at this broad spectrum. So what you just said was there's an immediate unsheltered person that just it's cold out. It's cold out. I need a place to stay. Right. Okay. Now let's compare that to research. Okay. What are the reasons why would you give to some sort of research-based entity or effort? Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Just wanted to remind people to always speak into a microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can repeat it. Yeah, I know. We're going back and forth. You're a good boy. I'll repeat it so that folks online can hear. Thank you. So the answer, the response was because you want to find a cure for something. Okay. Why else? What else would motivate you to give to research? Yeah. Personal experience. Yeah. So this is why I don't use PowerPoints, whatever else, because I just love taking the conversation and going down rabbit trails. And if I do PowerPoints, it gets all messy. So I don't even, so I'm gonna go on that rabbit trail, right? So, but it's not a rabbit trail because I think it's like, I don't know, bullet point 7 somewhere here. So let's go down that, and then we're going to come back to the research versus food. So you mentioned something that someone you may know may experience. So this is another hypothetical question about you deciding where to give. So we'll start with research, and I'll give you another practical example. So in the research column, you have a multitude of dilemmas, one of which is proximity to things and people you care about. Okay. So in the financial world, it usually doesn't play a huge factor, right? So when you invest, you may know nothing about the soft drink industry. But if an investment in Pepsi is a part of your portfolio because of their risk and this and that and whatever else, it can be a good investment, right? In the research world, if someone could have had a crystal ball and said, there's a disease out there and it is very, very specialized. There are 100 people in this world that have this disease, and this disease is fatal. And the individuals with this disease are all young people under the age of 20, because you really don't live past the age of your early 20s. And they said, crystal ball, with $100 million, we could find a cure for that disease. No more people will ever have a disease ever again. And they're on TV, they're following you on Facebook or whatever, and they're trying to hunt you down for your donation. At the end of the day, if you have never heard this disease in your life, and you believe that it's true, it's not fake, it's out there, you've never heard of that disease in your life, and you get that little mailer or whatever, I'd say your odds of giving to that aren't terribly high. Now, I could use show of hands. We're not going to do it. I'm just going to put it out there. Odds not very high. But if you get that mailer because someone who goes to church with you, their cousin has it, and so they're passing it into church mailboxes because their cousin has it. Okay, the proximity is a little closer, right? Because it's someone that you know is related to one of those 100 cases. Okay, and you keep marching that down, and no, it's not the cousin of the person who goes, it's the person who you go to church with, right? Like they're in your church. Now you're going to probably give something, right? You know, if you're engaged in I didn't mean to pick church, sorry. You could be any community that you're a part of. You're decently likely to contribute because you know this person's not going to make it. This person that you know, that you interact with, that you see, that you know their name, you know their story, is not going to live past the age of 22 without this. Like you're probably going to give. And if it's your daughter or your grandson, you are giving. Like I guarantee you are giving. It's just a matter of how many zeros are on the end of that check. No, I'm serious, right? Like at the end of the day, if it is your grandson or your daughter, you're in for whatever you can pull out, right? So that's interesting because objectively in the world, it's the same cause impacting the same number of people with the same. And I gave you the like total fake scenario of like, we know with 100 million, we can solve it, right? So like that doesn't even happen either. So that's the other dilemma with research we'll talk about in a second. But like, even if we had that, it's still not an obvious choice whether everyone in this room would get the same solicitation and make the same decision. And I would argue they shouldn't. So that's challenging about how you decide where to give, what is most effective, because for you, there's actually, I would argue, in the real world, a different decision than for somebody else, than for somebody else, than for somebody else. So, so there's this maybe takeaway number one for the day is this idea of proximity. How proximate are you to the issue or to someone who is very proximate to the issue? We'll dive more into proximity as we go here. But the other dilemma with research is the vast unknownness, right? So usually, almost never can I think of an example where you actually have a crystal ball that says for X amount of dollars, we can find a cure for X disease, which impacts Y number of people. You do a math equation and you say, is it worth $1 million per person or 100,000 per person or whatever it is? You usually don't get that. It's very unknown. But in our society's history, if we hadn't spent any money here, where would we be? Right? I mean, we wouldn't probably have near the life expectancy that we have now. We'd have many, many more infant deaths. We'd have many, like you just work through all the various health things. So someone along the way had to decide that the long arc of the future and the long arc of the unknown, we're going to waste billions of dollars down trails that lead nowhere to finally be on the trail that leads to something meaningful for a cure, was worth it. That same person who had the option of giving to the local person who was unsheltered when it's 10 degrees outside and needed a place to stay. Or not even local, the same international place in the world where life expectancy is 32 and clean water stands between 32 and that number going up to 42. And we know there are people every single day who don't have calories in their bodies, right? Like those are the same decisions. Like that's actually heavy, right? Like, sorry for Monday morning heaviness. Like I live in this world and it just gets me every time. Like I've literally said these same words hundreds of times and it's still like, I get emotional when I think about it. Those are heavy decisions. Like those are two very real things that you could use your philanthropic resources for, and you could sleep very well at night with either choice. I helped impact the immediate need right in front of me where it was cold and the person didn't have a place to stay. Or I contributed to the long arc of finding a cure for cancer or Parkinson's or you name it, Alzheimer's, like stuff, right? Like that, whew. I mean, that's like one, just both. I'll just do both, right? Like, I mean, you kind of get to the like, I want to be a part of it all because there's so much good stuff. But if you say both again and again and again and again and again, unless there's someone in the room that I'm not familiar with, you don't have an unlimited checkbook, right? So you usually have some sort of finite amount of resources to work with. And so saying yes and yes and yes and yes and yes all the way down isn't always the answer either. Because then it's like, well, now the spreadsheet's got 54 lines and, we're divvying this up, right? So that's not always the answer either. Okay. So that was a little research-based tangent. But now let's come back to and I kind of got there with the like basic needs versus research. When it comes back to outcomes, there's a question of time. So time to experience the outcome, right? Like how fast is that dollar being turned into impact in the world? And basic needs stuff goes much quicker. Food, provide a home, shelter, like that stuff goes fast. As you get further down, if you're investing in a college, right, or higher ed, like that investment is not about some 18-year-old's immediate basic needs, right? It's about the belief that investing in access to higher education can help that individual change the trajectory of their family's financial success for decades and generations to come, right? That is another long arcing, maybe the data probably gives you a slightly better chance of knowing success than here, right? Research is very scattershot. This is probably a little bit more targeted. We know that the vast majority of kids that get access to college are able to achieve kind of life-sustaining wages, and but it's still a very long-term play. And then we haven't even mentioned faith-based, right? So depending on where you stand with your own personal kind of spiritual beliefs, there would be many in this community who would argue that you should just forget everything else, right? No, I mean serious, right? That's not a judgment on whether that is you or not. I just want to be really clear. Like that is just saying that there are many who it is. This is about kind of souls, right? I mean, this is your soul after life that is much more important than the time here on earth for many people. So they would just say, they may use they may say we can use other things to achieve that end, right? Christian schools or getting access to people through different kind of other services. And so they're not mutually exclusive, but they would say kind of the motivation for where they're giving isn't even in the physical realms of financial stability or long-term health or whatever. The frame is actually about beyond the physical self. Yeah, please.
Will go to faith-based and they will only give to the church because they let the church decide those others.
Yeah.
It's not,
Yep.
It's just, oh, thank you.
Now, yeah. Yes.
What?
Yep.
Because I know people have told me.
Yes. Yeah. So the comment for those listening online was that for many people, they give to their church and then have the church decide which of these other places to go with the resources. And that's a mechanism by which they're choosing to give and trusting another entity, which is not unlike what a lot of us do up here. You have a financial advisor, an investment advisor, and you actually don't wake up every day thinking about this stuff, and you trust someone else to make the choice of how to invest here. The same thing can be done here, which is another one of our points that we will make over here. Because while I am doing a whole lot of it's hard, I'm going to try to build over the course of time to some things that you can at least try to work on. And trust is a very, very big piece of that, because somebody is making the choice between all these things, right? So even in that scenario, when you're trusting your church, some group of people at your church, maybe it's deacons or maybe it's pastors, or depending on what your denomination looks like, it could be a denomination or a higher body or whatever it may be. But you're trusting somebody to make decisions. They have the same decisions. They have the same decisions to be made about how to invest resources in the community for impact. So, but we'll get to trust in a little bit here, because that is a big piece of it. Okay, so have I successfully made the case that this is very not possible universally, meaning there is not a X's and O's, dollars in, dollars out, way that we can not only not look forward to predict what charitable investment is going to have the biggest outcome, but even looking back, right? So maybe I haven't made that point quite as clear. Even looking back, let's just say we had that same $1,000, and the front end, you got to choose between, we've been talking about housing, let's talk tutoring education. You can invest in a tutoring, after school tutoring program, or you can invest in an addiction recovery nonprofit. So you do $1,000 in, and let's just say that both organizations are just top notch, 10 out of 10. They are really, really good. So we're going to set that aside, not debating which is more effective for now. They are both really good. And they take your $1,000, and that translates into 25 students getting tutored after school every day. Every one of those kids, grades go up, confidence goes up, safe, loving place after school. Everything you hoped for, everything you dreamed for is happening with your $1,000. Kids' lives are changed. I mean, like, boom, this is huge. That happens here. And down here, your $1,000, and that addiction program is just spot on. And they, 25 individuals, because of your $1,000, are able to break their cycle, and are fully clean, lives back on track, taking care of themselves. And you are like, whoa, those were two really, really impactful choices. I couldn't go wrong, right? Amazing things. And you still have to decide which one you're going to give to. And I would argue, looking backwards, and the front end, you didn't know that per se, but turns out great, couldn't have gone wrong. But looking backwards, you say, how do I know? What was the biggest impact in the world for my $1,000? Was it the 25 people who broke the cycle of addiction? Was it the 25 young people, students, who are now on a much brighter path for their future? I mean, how do you make that choice? Looking for help here. You and I are on the same wavelength. Yeah, he's like, the answer was gut. So the online folks, they say first he tapped his tummy, and I was like, is he hungry? No. Yeah, he says trust. He said trust your gut. Did you see my talking points? No. So we'll talk about it. So, okay, now I've successfully made the case that it is impossible to choose what's the most impactful, effective, universally, both looking forward and looking backward, because there's no ledger in the world to be able to say what is more important, a young person academically achieving, or a parent who is no longer addicted. There's no mathematical equation. So with that being said, now let's talk about what can we think about with that kind of bringing you down. Now we'll try to bring it back up a little bit. What can we possibly do? So we hit some of the things that I would argue are the best chances we have. I'm going on one. Well, let's do proximity. So let's we did proximity earlier with a question around research and disease. Let's play that one out in the arts. Okay. So theater, symphonies, sculpture parks, like in the arts. Let's do a little bit of talking together here. So if someone process for me a little bit, if you're thinking about an arts experience, what are you looking for? Like, what's not for giving, let's just say for you participating now. Let's start there. Well, if you're going to go to a show or some sort of like museum, or like, what are you looking for? Enrichment. Okay. What would be an enriching experience for you? Like, describe that for me. Something that makes you think, feel, gets you outside yourself. Keep going. This is good. Quality. Okay. Quality of the performance or of the art piece. If it's my son who painted the picture, maybe not the same impact for you. Yep. inspiration. Okay. This is good. Education to learn something, but if you're specifically going to museums or something that you hear things or read things that you didn't know before, enjoyment, have fun. So we just named quite a wide variety of things, right? Because some things that are educational aren't fun. Some things that are inspirational, yeah, you get my point. So what's interesting is we could go throughout this room and on Zoom, and we could go on a field trip to 5 different parks, theaters, museums, and every one of you would rate each of those things differently in terms of your enjoyment, your inspiration, how much you've learned. If it's something you know a lot about already, then that's not going to be that interesting to you, right? And so this is fascinating because what impact looks like, now it's not about giving, we're talking about just like the experience actually is very different person by person. So should the local symphony be playing music that's like X or Y or Z? Because some folks are going to like music X, they're going to find that inspirational, moving. Some are going to like Y and some are going to like Z. And so what in the arts, in the case of the arts, it tends to be that the resources are given to the arts. Whoever gives the resources usually gets to help determine to some extent what types of experiences are being had. And to some extent, that's logical, right? Like the folks who are going to the performances, who are going to the ballet, who are going to the sculpture park, whatever it may be, they are engaged in the process. It's not a bad thing. That my comment was not about like, you should give and then keep giving, even if they start playing music that's just not your style, right? That was not my point, right? This is very logical as to how this happens. If they stop performing music that you find enjoyable, inspirational, whatever, you're probably going to stop giving to them, or at least less likely to give as much as before. And that's very logical. It happens a lot with colleges, higher ed. Which colleges are you most likely to give to? The one you went to. Now, look, I'm just going to admit it right now. I'm sorry, but I'm a Calvin grad, and here I am on Hope's campus. I know I shouldn't have gone there, but I did. So here's my thing. So at the end of the day, like I am more likely to give to Calvin than to Hope. Now, first off, in the grand scheme of life, I know it's a big rivalry. In the grand scheme of life, if I followed a bunch of other metrics of kind of where to give for higher ed, I mean, they're pretty similar. I mean, right at the end of the day, like they're pretty close, right? Nope. Someone's in the back said, nope, not even close, not even close. I picked bad examples. But you get my point that like at the end of the day, like there's a bazillion colleges out there that are training young people, equipping them hearts and minds and all the things. And we tend to get to the ones that we are most proximate to. So I'll end that point by saying it is okay to just name out loud. I'll get you saying that where you give is going to be driven by your proximity to that institution. Either you went there or you benefited from their services at a point in your life when you needed them, or the health need or issue that's being worked on is by someone close to you, but your proximity to that issue is a very okay thing to evaluate as you make decisions. Yes, please.
You brought up the example of music. So I have $10,000 and I want to hear music X as opposed to Y or Z. Do I still give it if it's rap? Call it rap crap. If it's rap, it's something that you really don't care for at all.
That's right.
I'm going to generalize that,
Yeah,
and I'm
yeah.
going to give you a specific. It's a rabbit trail,
Please.
but I'll do it anyway.
Please.
I turned 72 this past year. So for the first time, I had to learn what required minimum distribution was, what donor advised fund was, and what QCD qualified charitable.
Yeah.
So if I wanted my grandkids to go to school X and I wanted to give them a QCD of $20,000, and the school says it can't be for your 2 grandkids, it has to peanut butter spread for what we feel like maybe $5 a kid off for tuition.
Yeah.
That is a dilemma. And it's the same thing with the organization you're in.
Sure.
In the example of the music you gave, I wanted to hear, which I don't, I wanted to hear
Yeah,
X music, and you're going to
Right.
say, we'll decide. And
right,
prevailing theme is it's going to be Z, it's going to be rap.
right,
Alan Symphony's not going to play rap.
right. Right.
What do you do
Right.
with that dilemma when
Yeah.
you're looking at donating to something? Do you
That's right.
just step over it and skip it? Because and I'm posing
Yeah.
that question to
Yeah.
the group because this is
Yeah.
a real question for
Yes,
me.
you
I'm
have
going
100%.
through right now.
100%. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, it is, I would say my experience by and large is, we can maybe carve out for a second the question about dollars to a college for your own kids. There is some IRS stuff to do with that. But the point you're making broadly, I would say at the end of the day, if you're supporting an institution that is no longer offering products and services that you connect to, you should stop giving to them. I mean, mine don't include it. I'm not here for the community foundation. I'm just saying, like, this is like pulling stuff out of all the stuff that I'm involved in. There's a lot of options for places that you to give to. Now there's elements you could say like, oh, Mike, don't say that. Like now we're going to like, it's furthering this whole, like, we only talk to people who we know and we like, and we don't talk to people any different than us. And I agree with all that. Right. So like, I very much, we can have another half session on that. Like, that's not good for society. But like, am I really looking in the eye and say, you know what, they used to play classical and they were really good at it, and you're classical and now they're playing rap? No, you better keep giving your 10 grand every year till right. No, I'm not gonna do that. That's right. That doesn't feel right. So it is a dilemma, but I would say, I'm working with a family right now that's going through this. There's an organization they've supported for a long, long time. Very, very, they're probably one of the organization's top 3 supporters, and they're really struggling with what the organization is focusing on right now. They're deciding whether to pull out. And then they've been given to this organization as a family, grandparents, parents. I mean, it's talking 60 years probably they get in this organization, and they're wrestling with, do they move on now? In their case, they're writing a big enough check that there's a process for how they move on that I think can be done thoughtfully, tastefully, and well. But I mean, you're not beholden to continue to give the same organizations over and over. And I would argue you shouldn't be. I think, because I do think, some of this gut proximity stuff does matter. Now, I will say, I'm not a particular fan. This is just my personal opinion. I'm not a particular fan of, if you've supported an organization for a long time and you still agree with 95% of what they're doing, but there's like one piece that you don't like. I'm not a particular fan of just throwing the whole thing out and saying, forget it. Now, depending if that one thing is important enough to you from a value standpoint that you just got to call it, that's fine. But I would say we do tend to move on a little quickly sometimes, where it's like, I'm good with most of that, but like there's this one little piece, nope, out, game over. I think that I may be caution against. Please, yeah.
Several people at home are interested in your speaking to
Okay.
resources to evaluate the efficiency of organizations.
Yeah, good. Okay, so yeah, we've got, I think we're going to 11, 10:30, 11. Good. Okay, I was measuring to 11. I was like, we only had 10 minutes. I was to go fast. So we got 11. Okay, so efficiency of organization. So let's get to this. Sorry, that was written poorly. So this is one that we can do somewhat looking backwards. So I mentioned earlier, give $1,000, 25 kids, changing the world, 25 people, broke addiction. Looking backwards from an efficiency standpoint, for many of these things, you can get some sense, not perfect, but you can get some sense of how many folks were impacted per dollar, right? So it depends. It gets easier based on the issue. So let's pick housing. So if you're about to make an investment in an affordable housing developer, so they're building units, not a homeless shelter, but actual housing units. At the end of the day, you can look at their track record and say, hey, you've built 1,000 affordable homes, apartments, whatever it be, units in your history. How much did you spend to build those 1,000 units? And I can look at some other organization and say, okay, you spent, X 100,000 per unit to build. You spent 150,000. You spent 50,000. There are some financial ways to be able to look back at organizations and say, how much did it cost per home built? Or how much does it cost per student tutored? Or how much does it cost, per attendee that goes to the civic theater, that you can look at. It isn't always a predictor of what's going to happen going forward, but it can often be a pretty good sense of the cost per person or per unit. It doesn't necessarily help us with the food scenario where we had, is it about the healthiness and quality of the food or the number of people served? So in that exact scenario, you would advantage the organization who is serving the volume of food versus the quality, healthiness of the food. But if that feels right to you, then have at it, right? But that measure may not be the best measure if you were actually more focused on the healthiness of the food than the quantity of the food. You might actually end up supporting the not the organization that aligns with your values, if you can get. Now, how you get at that information, honestly, I mean, I would just ask. You can use 990s is the tax form that nonprofits have to fill out for the federal government. They're all available online. The best way to find them actually is through an organization called GuideStar. You can find all nonprofit 990s out there. So you can use the 990 to get at that information, but honestly, it's a messy tax form. It wasn't set up for readability. It was set up for the IRS to do their thing. So I would just ask. I would ask organizations, a lot of them put out annual reports or other things so you can look that way on their websites. But I would just ask what's your total budget and how many people you serving, how many homes you building, how many people come to the various performances, or are you serving on the healthcare side? And depending on the size and scope of the organization, they should be able to give you information fairly reasonably. So on the dollars and cents side, I would get at that. One of the measures that a lot of people try to use that I'm not a huge fan of, and I'll give you my reason why, but they call it the overhead ratio. So the overhead ratio is I'm going to run out of space here, but it's the percent of the dollars from an organization's budget that is spent on overhead. So cost of staff, administration, buildings, facilities, things that aren't the program. It is a very good attempt at measuring something important that falls, in my opinion, quite short of achieving its goal. Philosophically, this makes really good sense, right? At the end of the day, if you're judging between tutoring programs and one tutoring program, it costs $1 million to serve 100 kids, and another one, it costs $100,000 to serve 100 kids. Go for the 100,000 to serving 100 kids, assuming the quality of that experience for the kids is somewhat similar. So that philosophically, that makes sense. Most of us would not say, nah, we should spend more money than we need per student if this outcome is the same. It's just usually you don't have that kind of petri dish, right? Like you don't have that kind of scenario where it's that easy to measure. Quality was the same, outcome was the same. One person spent a lot more on overhead administration than the other. So I think it's hard to measure. The other thing is the way nonprofits can calculate that number, you're self-calculating. So you're not, some outside entity is not coming in, looking at your books and determining what your overhead ratio is. You are self-putting the numbers into what is considered program, what's considered fundraising, what's considered administration. And I'm sorry to say, but I've been on a lot of nonprofits who get pretty creative in their math around what ends up in program, administration, and fundraising, because guess what? People talk about overhead ratios. So they want their overhead ratio to be what people want it to be. So I'm not like, I wouldn't put a whole lot of stake in the numbers that I see coming out of people's overhead ratios, because I've seen the back end math that goes into it. And please, I'm not about throwing people under the bus or whatever. I'm just saying that like, it's a bit of a, if it was an outside entity who was coming in and looking at your books and kicking out a number, and that was consistent across all nonprofits all over the world, that measure would be different. That's not what you're getting. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yep. So for those online, the comment was about Charity Navigator as a place to go that does outside entity evaluating nonprofits and their effectiveness as a helpful place. Again, I would say absolutely the kind of the philosophy behind it, totally right on. I think they by nature are so one Charity Navigator is probably your best option. I'll put it that way. I think they're one of if not the best option for doing this. It is still very, very, very imperfect. I think that's maybe what I would say is they have the same dilemma that we have. Like if they were all in the room today, I'd be like, so which one? 25 kids tutoring, 25 folks addiction. And they would look at me and say, right, they have the same dilemma that everyone else does, right? So they have better access to more information than you do, and they spend all day long trying to process that information, which saves you a lot of time. So I would say those two things are very true. Aggregating information, distilling it, getting a broad range, they can be helpful on that. They cannot tell you how proximate you are to the issue, right? They cannot, the universe of nonprofits is massive. There are 2,000 nonprofits in Ottawa County. 2,000 in Ottawa County. Now, many of those are very small, volunteer run, not very big, probably aren't asking you for money. But statistically, there are 2,000 organizations you could give to in Ottawa County only. We haven't even talked about local versus national versus international. Talk about that in a second. That's fun. So my point is, so like no matter what system kind of like they're using, if there's 2,000 Ottawa County, I don't know, there's millions across the country. So it's limiting. That's my point. I would say it's limiting, but helpful tool, but limiting. So if we could be omniscient and we could figure out how much people spend on overhead and other things, then I would trust that tool. I just don't necessarily have full confidence in the numbers that we're getting. Now, let me also present something to challenge the tool, right? So even if we had omniscience, wouldn't that be great? I mean, I'd love that. So maybe I wouldn't actually. Jury's out. Okay. So if we had omniscience and we had exact overhead ratios of how much money people were spending on staff and space and in chairs and other kinds of things compared. Let me challenge whether that's even the marker that we should be using for effectiveness or efficiency. So let me pick on one that's kind of under here. Let's go preschool, local preschool, 4 local preschools, nonprofit preschools. And one preschool pays their staff $13 an hour, the teachers, $13 an hour to run the classes, which isn't actually very far off from the going rate right now. Another one pays 15, another one pays 17, whatever. I don't know the fourth one. 3, 13, 15, 17. On a overhead ratio, the $13 an hour one's going to win, right? They actually pay their staff less, so they're spending less on kind of overhead and compared to the other ones. I think we could debate whether that's really the right play, right? Like, would you go 15 or would you go 17? I could have picked a number that maybe the fourth one pays 32, right? Let's nice easy example. Maybe that's too much, right? Like maybe it's like, okay, 13 was not feeling like maybe 32 feels a little excessive. I don't know. But like the point is, even the overhead ratio, it's hard to know because if the quality, again, of your delivery of the preschool product, meaning education and whatever else matters, well, then maybe paying more, having a less ideal overhead ratio is actually good, like actually leading to a better outcome because the kids are getting a better experience. And how to match make those two is so tough, right? Because now I need to know omnisciently the overhead ratio. Like I have to somehow find my way through the finagling of budgets and things to figure out the actual overhead ratio. And then I have to decide which of the preschools is the most effective at good quality teaching, because it could very easily be that some of the $13 an hour teachers are absolutely way better than the $17 an hour teachers, right? There's no guarantee that the teachers making $70 an hour are better teachers than the $13 an hour ones. No guarantee. You can't just assume that. So you can't just assume that a higher overhead ratio means better quality either, right? You can't just say, well, that affordable housing developer spent more money building the house, so the house must be a higher quality. You can't assume that either. So this is why it gets complicated. So I would say, but getting some sense of dollars per person served, unit served is a big piece. I'll put this under the gut thing, but to me, a big piece of how you actually determine effectiveness of an organization, particularly if you're doing it local, it's a little easier, is to visit the organization. Not every service is going to be conducive for you to visit. If you're thinking about supporting organizations that are helping children who've been abused sexually, they're not going to like let you sit on the counseling session, right? Like, and you should, right? But so that's an example where they're not. But like there are others you can, right? You can actually visit. I mean, one, you could be a tutor, right? You could go to the food pantry and see physically what kind of food is on the shelves, what kind of healthiness and quality and whatever. In this college university, this is why people give here. Because they can go on campus. They had the experience themselves. They know what it was like. They know the professors, they know the teachers. So like that's actually easy. Like I was there, right? So why people give here. I went to the performance. I can tell whether it was quality from my perspective. Because I went and watched and listened. That's why a lot of folks give here. Because guess what? Every one of us making our way to that hospital sometime for something, right? And when you're there, like you experience it. So your ability to judge whether that organization feels like it's being effective is easier when you participate or you visit. So what did I say were the 3 highest places where dollars go? One, yeah, statistically is usually number 3. And what did I just say? What are the ones that donors themselves tend to participate in the most? 1, 2, and 3, right? Like, and it's logical because if you are going to your church or your place of worship on a very consistent basis, every week, multiple times a week, whatever, you have a pretty good judge about how dollars are being used. Did they install the gold-plated waterfall, with the dollars that you gave, right? Like you would actually see if there was a gold-plated waterfall in your church. So, and then same thing here and here. And so that's not necessarily bad. I would say some of this stuff explains why, right? Because you have proximity, you are more likely to be able to trust your gut because you have some ability to see what's happening and what's going on. And that leads to bigger dollar amounts going to these places. We could debate in the world whether we should have dollars go here, here, and here as our top 3 versus addiction, housing, tutoring, right? Like we could mental health. We didn't talk about that one yet. Animal welfare. We could debate that, but for now, I think it's understandable why dollars flow where they flow. We have an online question, it seems.
Yes, which really dovetails with what you're talking about.
Good.
This person from home was asking about the example of the American Red Cross that received a bad rep due to high overhead and cost issues.
Yep.
But isn't there more complicated calculus? And particularly for a big organization that has national, international, global reach.
Yes. Okay, great question. American Red Cross, a perfect, wonderful example to wrestle with. I'm going to take another little detour before we go back to our checklist and talk about 2 things that were just brought up, both in that exact same question. So we had this question of big versus small organizations and local, national, international. So if there wasn't enough layers of complexity on this whole thing, we're going to add 2 more. So let's talk local, national, international. So another big giant question mark, honestly, because I could sit here, you give me 10 minutes and I could probably almost convince you any one of the 3. I could have you jumping up being like, woo, let's go do it, right? Any one of them. So internationally, just pure statistically, your dollars go further in terms of the number of people impacted, right? Now that's a pure dollars and cents calculation. It's not a quality. That's not a, you have oftentimes very little ability to judge whether the organization is actually effective, or not. And you oftentimes don't have proximity, like all the things that like we just talked about, you often don't have. From a pure dollars and cents perspective, it is more expensive to feed a family here in Holland who is hungry than it is to feed a family in Central America, most of Africa, pure dollars, right? Particularly with the dollar being so strong right now, it's even cheaper, right? So like, that's interesting, right? Like the fluctuation of in the change in the denominations of capital and whatever else. But like, yes, right? If you had the exact same organization with the exact same quality and the exact same everything plunked here and plunked there, you get more food for your dollar there than here, right? So what do you do about that, right? You, at the same time, let's go back to civic theater, right? Or arts. Is it more important for us here in Holland to have quality, vibrant arts experience that are inspirational, engaging, or someone in a third world country that's extremely impoverished? I mean, I would have a hard time saying that is more or less important. I think humans are humans. That's my, like, I think everyone could benefit from that kind of inspiration, art, enjoyment, whatever else. Now, if you asked folks in slum in Rio de Janeiro, they probably would forego the arts for the food or the clean water or not having a gang extort your parents' grocery store on the corner. But as a human being in the world, do they need engagement, inspiration, joy from arts any less than the rest of us? I would say no. Now, Maslow's hierarchy is a thing, right? You make basic needs first and work to self-actualization. But like, even if you said I'm only going to give to arts, I think we could challenge what, like, who could benefit more from that art experience, someplace international or someplace not. International doesn't necessarily have to be poorer either, right? Like, I mean, we are a very blessed country. So many countries in the world have less resources than us, but there's also plenty of developed countries that we can invest in for different reasons too, right? We're even talking about, like, I'm staying away from everything about politics today, right? So like, we're not talking like that's big stuff in the world. Like, we fighting for democracy and this and that, whatever else. We're not talking about that. That's over there. Whoever's doing that one. But so I think this is a really big challenge. So national is one step closer, right? We can understand a little bit more the systems, the rules, the regulations. It's one step closer than international to be able to evaluate and have some sort of kind of gut what's going on. And you don't have language barriers. You don't have other kinds of things. It's one step more approximate, but has the same kind of challenges that you can't necessarily just go and visit the program. You might not be able to meet the staff as easily. And so depending on what work is happening nationally, it can be harder. But American Red Cross, could you go volunteer? Disaster happens. They need resources. They also need volunteers. Could you go and volunteer for a week and get a sense on the ground from your gut about whether those resources are being deployed accurately? Could you be a little bit more approximate to the issue? Another good example, flood happens. Pick a place in our country and you go volunteer for a week, helping with flood relief. I can almost guarantee that your check is bigger in that scenario than when the flood comes 3 years later and you don't go to volunteer, right? It's the same flood, maybe the same number of people impacted, but your proximity might be different. And if the flood is here in Holland, again, you're writing a check, right? Like, it's interesting. Like, this is the way it works. So I think this is a really tricky one. So I happen to run an institution that is all about giving locally. So I could, I'm not, but I could put on my community foundation hat and be like, here's the reasons why you should only, focus your giving locally and know the impact and all these kinds, like, we could do that. I'm not going to, but like, you could make that case too. I could also say like, well, yeah, look, even in Michigan, Ottawa County ranks pretty high on most metrics and statistics. We're the healthiest county in the state. Should we be investing in healthcare and things here? Or should we be investing in other counties? That's just in Michigan, not like even nationally or internationally, right? I can make that case. But do I think that we have lots of things happening in our community that aren't the way they should be and the way the world's supposed to be? Absolutely. That's why I have my job, right? I mean, I think very much local giving matters a ton. Because if you take care of those most proximate to you, and if everyone does that, right, that's a really healthy and good thing. So that is a tricky conundrum. I would say most people that I work with end up with some sort of like, because it's such a tricky one, they end up with some sort of balance. That's often what you see faith communities, often they have like a local missions budget and like a global missions budget. I would say that is the like we don't want to decide, not want to, sorry, that's terrible. That's not the right phrase. Like it's too hard to decide. There's not actually a right answer. So we're going to invest both globally and locally. And I would say as givers, that often happens as well, right? So like we actually see the value in both things or all three things. And so we're going to give in these different ways. American Red Cross. So let's just play that one out. They're both international, of course, but like on the national case. And that'll tie us to our big and small. So an organization that exists to respond to natural disasters. Does every community in this country need an organization fully equipped and set up, ready to respond to a natural disaster? I would argue the answer is no, because when a natural disaster happens, you don't have 3 weeks to get organized. You don't have 2 months to get organized. I don't know if you've ever been on one of these sites. Like when it goes down, you're there. Like the American Cross is there the next day. And frankly, their most important work is the first 7 days, maybe 10, because most people are a little bit more stabilized by 10 days. Think about that. Most of their work is done. Capital goes in, capital spent, 7 to 10 days. That's like start the clock today. Boom. Our job, solve the issue, 7 to 10 days. It would be silly to have an organization fully kind of staffed and equipped and operated with all the tents and the medical equipment and the whatever, like in every community, just waiting for natural disaster to happen. It would be such a waste of resources, quote unquote, right? Because most communities aren't going to have them. So what do we have? We have a bigger national-based organization who comes flying in no matter where it happens. Well, by nature, they're going to be a bigger organization than if you only had a local thing, right? Like if something happened here in Holland, we wouldn't need the full largesse of the American Red Cross flying in with all the things. We're just not that big of a community. But when New Orleans goes under, right? Like, yeah, we got to have the whole shebang. So it's a tricky one because I would argue, I'm not defending the American Red Cross or not. I have no loyalties to that as an organization. I'm just saying it makes sense to me why we would have a national, international kind of level of organization to respond to different things very quickly in that scenario. But the whole big versus small thing doesn't just play out local versus international, right? There's a lot of international, hyper-local interventions happening all over our world that are making huge differences. So the country that I know best is Honduras, because my wife spent some time living there and we both engaged very deeply. And I will tell you that like you can go to some really remote parts of Guatemala with programs that are making huge difference. Sorry, in Honduras, Guatemala too, but in huge ways in people's lives. But there's no way anyone in this room would ever be able to get your resources to that organization, like almost seriously, right? Like it would be almost impossible for you to like somehow find out about it, hear it, move the money through enough institutions from the United States to get to on the ground, whatever else. Because that's people, it's people helping people, right? Us humans do care for each other, right? By and large, I think we're wired to like care for community. So there's some amazing like hyper local things happening all over the world in our own community, right? And oftentimes small is exactly the right way to get things done because people, it's highly relational, the nuances, all the different things about it. You invest deeply. It's not just surface level, like you're all in. When you hit a speed bump, you don't just say, oh, that person fell off the wagon, let them go. Like you stick with people, you like drag them over the finish line, right? Like those things tend to happen in small, gritty kind of organizations. They know they serve, 200 people food versus 200,000. They know them by name. They know their story. They miss them if they don't come. If they missed a week, they get worried and they go check on them. Like that can happen on a small organization, which can be exactly the right way to go. And this is not, and it's here's as a assumption, but sometimes small organizations can be less efficient with capital, right? Big organizations can buy in bulk. We don't have to have multiple computer systems for all the small organizations, we can have one. You have training where people can fill in for each other if someone's missing, versus a small organization, if someone's out sick, then then we don't run the program today, right? Because there's not someone else to back up. We could spend a lot of time on it, but I would say there are such, in my opinion, there are big organizations that are just being the perfect response to the issue, exactly how they need to be, extremely efficient with capital, turns the capital into impact in really deep ways. And there are small organizations that are extremely efficient and effective, turning capital into impact in really meaningful ways as well. I don't think you can kind of say in the world that big or small is better, local versus international is better. And then the American Red Cross example, for me, when an organization gets kind of a bad rap around things, what I always try to go at and push at is what's leading that and what's causing that. One, I tend to be someone in general with news that I'm hearing from somebody else that I always try to dig at least a couple layers before I agree per se, or just try to learn. Some organizations can get a bad reputation and they deserve it, right? They actually, something's harmful happening, like harmful to people, misuse of resources. Unfortunately, that happens in this world, right? I wish it didn't. I wish no nonprofit ever misused money. I wish no nonprofit after school program ever harmed a child, or like, I just wish that would be the case, but it's not, right? So if someone gets a bad reputation, and I would say, and your digging says in your gut that it's deserved, yeah, then you should back off. But if you dig and it turns out that, well, someone's kind of mad because they're, they used to work there and they got let go because maybe they weren't doing a great job or weren't a good fit or whatever, and now they're around town giving a bad rep to some, right? You're like, I mean, those things can happen too, right? So you don't always know. There's a big question about like compensation. There's a lot of talk about that. Like these big organizations, their executive directors, CEOs make a lot of money. And so like, what is that good, bad, or other? I mean, in general, again, we talk about kind of executive compensation across for-profits, nonprofits. Again, another session, we could talk about that. I would say I get a little less anxious about that. I mean, some numbers are just exorbitant, right? Like there comes a point at which like, okay, that's too many zeros. But like in general, I would say like it's this other stuff, right? And I've got a few more minutes to get to a few of these other things, but I don't get too, as you're hearing, I hold pretty loosely to like any one measure as like, that's it. Like, that's the thing. Like, if I see that, I'm out. Or if I see that, I'm in. Like, you're not hearing that a lot from me. And that's not just because I'm trying to make you think today. Like, that's actually who I am when I help families and companies and folks do giving. There's not a lot of that kind of like, nope, that is the right or wrong thing to see for a nonprofit organization. So let me kind of circle back to this then. So we had this kind of like, I turned gut into part like, visiting or engaging. And I would say, I would split that into two camps. I would encourage one of the best things you can do is to both talk to kind of the staff and the volunteers who are providing the service, but also those who are receiving the service. Like in the ideal scenario, right? This is like the ideal scenario where you want to commit time and energy and effort into digging into the organizations you're talking about. Both talk to the staff and the volunteers, but also the individuals who are participating and being served. So in the case of counseling and mental health, we haven't talked about that yet. Talking to the staff and the counselors about the program they're involved in, you can gain a lot from talking to them and listening to them and kind of getting a sense of, do I feel like these folks feel like they're the kind of people I want to trust my money with, right? Yeah. But it's also important if you can, and it's tough in some of these instances, but like to get a sense from someone who's been through the program to say, how did they experience it? Because sometimes you have staff, I'm someone who comes across fairly articulate, fairly eloquent, and people will listen to me and say, wow, yeah, Mike seems great. Like, we can trust him, but you have no idea if all it is just a show and just talking, right? And just kind of smooth PowerPoints and a cool video, right? Like, no, that happens. Like where the staff are really kind of like, it's all buttoned up, sounds good, perfect, whatever else. But if the program itself is like, yeah, it's okay, but like, they don't really treat me that well, or, they cancel a lot because they don't have staff, or I don't, whatever, who knows what it could be. I'd say that's a big problem, right? So that's why I would encourage this kind of like visiting of both, as best you can, recipients, and those staff that are providing the service. Trust is a big deal. So for me, trust ties to some of these other ones, but who you trust, if you trust somebody with your resources, I'd say go for it. Right. And so you think about, okay, who would I trust with resources? So again, it can be a little bit easier on the local side, but let's just pick international. Let's just say there's somebody doing international missions and you had a chance to go on a trip to that place, and you build a relationship with the missionary who's doing the work. And you walked out trusting that person. Look, all day, every day, we decide who we trust, right? Your friends, parts of your family, you decide who trusts information, who doesn't, right? Like, we do it all day long. The same thing is true in philanthropy, right? So if you walk out and say, yeah, I feel like I trust those folks doing that work, you might not have to go back every year for the next 10 years. That level of trust, if you're deep in, if you spend a week in the mission field with somebody, that level of trust is probably going to last you a decade, right? You're probably going to feel comfortable trusting that person with resources for a season. Like maybe you will go back again someday, but like you're pretty all in. If you volunteer at a local nature-based, you're leading tours of people through the muck and the marshes, and you're cleaning stuff up, making our environment a better place. Like, and you're in it. Well, guess what? You're probably going to trust the resources of the organization because, like, it's you, right? Like, I mean, like, you're actually part of it, volunteering. And so, like, play out this proximity thing. Proximity often is very tied to trust. So maybe it's not you who leads the cleanup efforts of our local watershed, but maybe it's the son of one of your best friends runs the organization, right? You're decently likely to trust that person, maybe. And if you keep working your way out, if you don't have a connection to somebody, maybe you build a relationship. But you gotta find some ways to trust. Now, one thing you can do is you can trust other people. So the example of giving the resources to the church, who then is deciding, you can say, hey, look, I'm not going to know all the ins and outs of all the organizations, but I trust those in my church who are making choices where those dollars are going. So what you're doing, you're still basing it on trust. You're just trusting another set of people or persons to then make decisions on your behalf, kind of an intermediary. And that happens a lot, right? And so that's a great way to do it. Or it's, one of your best friends is on the board of an organization. And so since they trust the organization, you trust them and you go for it. So, but finding a way to trust, or you benefited from the services, right? Then it's easier to trust what's going on. Time, we mentioned earlier, just the time to turn your dollars into impact is again a factor you have to think about, right? You just think about, and look, I run an organization that's a lot of our dollars are endowments, right? This is a very long arcing, long horizon. And there are days I wrestle with that, right? I wrestle with the idea of these resources doing good for generations to come versus dollars making an impact now and immediate and things going on. Don't tell my board I just said that. No, it not, in all seriousness, it is. We should be thinking about it, right? We should be thinking about how fast resources turn into impact. But also some things take a long game, right? There's benefits taking the long arc too. Let me just quick check my checklist to see if there's anything else that I had that I wanted to make sure we caught. So I'm getting close on time here. We did this. So I would say the last thing, two things. So someone earlier mentioned joy when it came to because you mentioned joy over here. Yeah, Nancy. So you mentioned joy related to the arts. So my last two, first one would be that joy question. I would give where you find joy. At the end of the day, if you're looking at, if you, let's just say you support 3 organizations, 5 organizations, 15 organizations, at the end of the day, when you're doing your giving on an annual basis or whatever you are, and you looked on the list and your heart gives a little flutter when you read a name of an organization that you've supported either one time or for a long time, keep going there. And if you're not feeling it anymore, pause and question. But at the end of the day, giving should be a joyful experience. You have plentiful options. So, and I would just, now you have the freedom to say, well, Mike said that all the options are great. He said there's no way to, right? Like there's no way to exactly determine what will be the most calculated impact in the world. So follow your heart. If you're finding joy in the giving and the impact you're making, I'd say that's a really big deal. Now, it's not because it's about you, right? Like, don't hear me say it's because like we're living in this like really kind of self-narcissistic society where it's all about you. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if you relatively have trust and proximity and you have a sense that it's being used well and all the other things and it's giving you joy, then good. Then that's a really good thing. And the last thing that I'll say is probably the one only tangible piece of advice I'm going to give the whole hour and a half is you can help yourself out if you decide to give yourself a frame for how you make decisions. So if you just believe what I just said, that there's no frame out there that can be given to you that says, here's the frame by which you should put your decision matrix through. Then what I am saying though, is you can create your own frame and say, how do I feel about some of these dichotomies that Mike threw out today? How do I feel about the quality of food, healthiness versus the quantity of food? How would I feel about 25 students getting tutoring and being on a good path versus 25 breaking the cycle of addiction? How do I feel about, kind of this faith piece, college, and create your frame, local, national, international, big, small, like create your own frame to say, hey, I still have to make decisions. Mike gave us a nice little talk, but like, I still have to, at the end of the day, have all those envelopes that come in. I know I'm one of the ones who mailed them to you. Like you get them all and you got to decide where you're giving your resources. So you can create your own frame to say, basically what Mike said is I can't go wrong to some extent. So let me create a frame. I'm going to focus my giving on local. I'm going to take my giving and I'm going to say 40% I want to stay local, 40% I want to go international, and I'm going to leave a low pot of 20% to be really responsive depending on what comes up throughout the year. Okay. And I tend to have a preference for kind of bigger, more established organizations that I know aren't going to go away tomorrow, or I just feel like there's more accountability because they're bigger. Or conversely, no, I actually like smaller organizations that be a little more nimble, a little more, close to community. I'm okay if that means they're not as efficient. You pick your thing and then you say, you want to know what? Like, I want my giving to be really through a faith-based lens. Like that is my thing. Like that is, everything's going to be through that. Or, want to know what? Like, I really want mine to be immediate impact. I don't want to be kind of a long-term, long arcing. So I'm going to focus on more immediate impact things. Or within the arts, like I'm actually going to actively focus on art mediums that connect to the audiences that aren't the kind of things that I really enjoy, because I want other people to have access to arts mediums. Or no, you know what, I'm going to focus on things that really give me joy because I think that could be really helpful for other people in the same kind of, you get my point. Create a little frame for yourself that you can kind of take your decisions through, and that can help you as you decide which direction you want to go. If I'm getting pushed in a corner, I will say I do tend to see that more people find more joy when they shrink the number of organizations they support. So I said I wouldn't give any there's no absolutes, but I would say on average, I have seen that with the universe of amazing ways you can impact the world, if you can get honed in on a couple, 2, 3 things that you can do, you tend to feel a little more joyful because you tend to know what's going on a little bit more. You tend to be plugged in a little bit more. You tend to read all their stuff. Maybe you have access to the staff to kind of get a gut sense. Maybe you actually are willing to put the time in to go visit the program and see what's going on. You build relationships with people. You actually ask for that kind of budget, right? Like all the things that I mentioned that, so I will say that's my one tidbit, and don't be afraid to hone in on a couple, 2, 3, even though your heart's going to tell you all these other things are amazing too. I think you'll find an immense amount of joy and impact if you can kind of shrink that list a little bit. One habit that I think is pretty nice is I encourage people to take 10 or 20% of your giving and let that be kind of for what I call it friends and family, right? So one of the things that tends to happen because of this proximity issue is a lot of people give, like when someone knocks on your door for a mission trip, like if it's someone you don't know, maybe you give $10. If it's your actual neighbor, maybe you give 50. And if it's your grandson, you're going to give 200 or whatever. Like, because of that, it can be helpful to kind of set a little bit of a budget for friends and family and say, I'm going to set aside 10 or 20% of what I think I'm going to give for the year for kind of when my friends and family call for things they're engaged with. And I'm going to take the rest and I'm going to go after a couple, 2, 3 things. Because if you don't kind of not in a weird way, but kind of like set yourself a little bit of a budget over here, this can really grow because of proximity. And so that may be one other little piece I'll throw out there. I know I'm a couple minutes over, I think. So I got thumbs up. Well, I mean, I'm right on time. So are there any other questions, thoughts, or comments? I like spending time with you guys. This is good. Online folks, anything that they were dying to ask that I didn't get to? Okay, good. Well, hope it was semi-helpful. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Sun might be shining here, and don't hesitate if there's any other things I can be helpful with, let me know. So